Hi, so what we're going to do in these PowerPoints is we're going to cover the entire of National 5. So we're starting with Unit 1. Unit 1's first key area is cell structure. And this section, Section 1, is about the functions of structures that you would find inside cells.
Okay, so what we're going to be covering in this is we're going to be covering the different functions of the different structures that we find within plant and animal cells. So starting on plant and animal cells. So by the end of this video, the things that you should be able to do is you should be able to state the function of all the different organelles in the animal and plant cells, and you should be able to state which organelle is specifically made of cellulose. That's a really important one to know.
Okay, so let's get started with the first structure. So inside the cell, there are going to be structures inside it. Just like how we have bodies and we have organs inside of us, cells, very, very, very small things, have got organelles, tiny little organs. The first one we're going to look at is the nucleus. Now, the nucleus, you should know this from S1 and 2 anyway. It controls all cell activity. Now, it contains the DNA in the form of chromosomes, so that's strands of this chemical called DNA, and that decides your characteristics and things like that. So if you're ever asked in an exam, what's the function of the nucleus? Controls the cell, perfectly acceptable answer.
Next thing is the cytoplasm. It's a bit of the obscure one because it's actually pretty much the background of the cell, so not really a specific structure itself. It is whenever it points to what's looking like just a blank space in the background, that's what the cytoplasm is. And this is where all of the chemical reactions in the cell happen. And then we're going to look at a lot of these reactions and we're going to talk about them happening in the cytoplasm, and that is exactly what this is.
Okay, next one is the cell membrane. So the cell membrane runs around the outside of the cell, and it is there acting as a gatekeeper. It's controlling what can come in and what can leave, because obviously you don't want everything just going higgledy-piggledy everywhere. So you want to be able to keep its contents inside there, but you don't want to let everything in. You know, you've got a lot of muck that's floating around in your blood. You don't want all of that getting into your cells. That would be a really bad plan. So the cell membrane controls entry and exit of substances to and from the cell. That word substances is quite important in terms of exam language. Not stuff, not things. It has to be substances.
Good way to think about the cell membrane is it's a bit like the bouncer of the cell. It lets some things in, it doesn't, because it will have certain criteria and say, yes, you meet the criteria, and you go, no, you don't meet the criteria, go away. Next one, mitochondria. Again, a really important one. It links into the topic of respiration that we're going to cover soon, because as it says in this first line, it is the site of aerobic respiration. So not all respiration, just aerobic respiration, but that will be touched on more later, what that means. And this is where the cell's energy is produced. And that energy is in the form of a molecule called ATP. Again, more on this when we talk about respiration.
So this is a bit of an exam sort of point. Is that quite often an exam question that will come up that says, I don't know, why does a sperm cell have more mitochondria than a skin cell? Now, mitochondria produce energy, or I don't like that term, producing energy, but the idea is they release a lot of useful energy for the cell. Now, if that cell is a really hard-working cell, like a sperm cell which has to swim really vigorously, or a muscle cell which has to contract, then it's going to need a lot of mitochondria to make all of that energy so that the cell can do its job. Skin cells are just sitting there. They're not really using a lot of energy. So there's no real need for them to have loads and loads of mitochondria. So as it says there, people who are participate in lots of sport will have a much higher number of mitochondria in their muscles because they will have more muscle cells compared to someone who doesn't. Equally, cells that do a very active job will have more mitochondria than cells that don't.
Next one is the ribosome. Again, this links to a process that you're going to talk about in the next couple of videos. This is protein synthesis. So the ribosome simply is the site of protein production. So basically, it's where a protein is actually made. That's what protein synthesis means. It is the making or the building up of proteins. So that is all about the ribosome.
Okay. The cell wall. So the cell wall is going to provide support and structure to the cell. And it is made of cellulose implants. Now, we deal with this first point, support and structure. Quite often I see exam answers where it's saying the cell wall protects the cell. That is completely wrong. It will lose your marks. Never, ever say the cell wall protects the cell. It does not. It supports and provides structure. For me, I like to think of the cell wall as like scaffolding on the outside of a building. It does not protect from weather. It doesn't stop burglars getting in, but it is holding the building up. Okay, and that is all that it's doing. It's providing support and structure. Not every cell will have a cell wall. There are some that don't, that we'll look at later. But the idea is in plants, this cell wall is made of cellulose, and that's a little exam point that likes to crop up every now and then. There's other cell walls in fungal and bacterial cells that's made of other stuff. You don't need to know what it is, but the idea is in plant cells, the cell wall is going to be made of cellulose. Okay.
Animal cells don't have a cell wall. Really important to remember that one. The next one is the chloroplast. Again, relates to another process that you will learn about this time. It is photosynthesis. So it is the site of photosynthesis. You might have learned about this a bit in S1 and S2, but this is the process in which plants basically produce their energy in a way, and it's all about where glucose is being produced, which is a type of sugar, which is basically that food source that plants have.
Okay, next up is the vacuole. So the vacuole, its job is to store sap and water inside the cell. I like to think of it more like a camel's hump. The idea is the more that it's storing, the bigger that it is, the less that it's storing, it actually shrinks down. It's not the same size all the time. Okay, but the job of it is it's storing cell sap inside plant and fungal cells. Okay. So if we have a look at the sort of answer, just a summary table here, the nucleus contains DNA, controls the cell.
The cytoplasm is the site of chemical reactions.
The cell membrane is going to control entry and exit of substances to the cell.
Mitochondria is the site of aerobic respiration.
The ribosome, site of protein synthesis.
The cell wall supports the structures of the cell and is made of cellulose in plant cells.
The chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. And finally,
the vacuole stores water and sap inside the cell. So if you get an exam question saying, what is the function of this organelle? That is what you write, and you will get the mark. Or contradictory, not contradictory, but vice versa. They might give you, here is the function, what organelle does this? So you need to know it both ways. So something like a flashcard would be really good to learn this. Organelle on one side, function on the other side.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Now, the reason why these are so important, these cell structures, you need to know what type of cell they are found in, and also something that's a little clue for the future. All of these cell structures that you can see in front of you, we look at in other key areas. So we've got a whole key area called DNA. So there we have a look at the nucleus. We've got a key area called photosynthesis. So we're going to be looking at the chloroplast. In a few weeks' time, you'll be looking at aerobic respiration and respiration. So mitochondria is going to feature there, and the cytoplasm. So these cell organelles are the building blocks for this course. It is super important that you can try and memorize these functions. So as Ms. Armstrong said, flashcards, brilliant practice for the memorization of these.
Okay, so that's the end of the first video. Hopefully now you should be able to state the function of the different organelles that can be found in animal and plant cells, and state which organelle is made of cellulose, that important one to do with plants there. Now we'll touch on more on what these look like, the different, so what these look like in the cells, and then going on to other types of cells and the organelles found in them as well.
In section 2 and 3.